This week's Ocho Points podcast is brought to you by nothing. When you're looking for something and all you can find is nothing, think of the Ocho Points podcast. On this week's episode, we'll cover UFC 185 and Pete Rose trying to get back into baseball. Let's begin. So, as I said off the top of the show, this week I will be covering UFC 185 and Pete Rose trying to be reinstated into baseball. I'm only going to cover two topics this week because I've been very, very sick all this week and I don't know how long I can go. I'm probably not going to be able to do a long podcast, which is why I decided to do just two topics this week. So once again, this is going to be a short podcast week. Now, I previewed a little bit last week UFC 185, which was taking place last Saturday, March the 14th, from Dallas, Texas. And it was a card that I was looking forward to, and man, it was a card that I enjoyed. Even though 4 out of the 5 fights on the main card went to decisions, I still really enjoyed this pay-per-view. The only match that I really didn't enjoy too much was the Johnny Hendricks versus Matt Brown fight, and I'll get into that in a second. The first fight on the main card was Henry Cejudo versus Chris Carriazo. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing both gentlemen's names correctly. I think I mispronounced them a little bit, so I apologize for that. I really enjoyed this fight. This saw Henry Cejudo get the unanimous decision, 30-27, 30-27, 30-27, as scored by all 3 judges. I thought it was a pretty good fight. I didn't know what to expect from this fight because I really didn't know much about either of these two fighters. I'd never really seen any of their other fights, or I don't remember seeing any of their other fights, but I thought it was a pretty good matchup. I enjoyed it, and as I said, Henry Cejudo came out on top, which brought us to a heavyweight battle between Alistair Overeem and Roy Nelson. Now, this is the fight that I thought was going to be either really, really good or really, really bad. I didn't really foresee it being anywhere in the middle ground, but I was wrong. It wasn't an overly exciting fight, but it wasn't extremely boring either. Alistair Overeem sort of just picked Roy Nelson apart. Roy Nelson had some good punches throughout the fight, but Roy Nelson just kept looking for that one big knockout punch that he's capable of, and he just couldn't find it. And in the meantime, Alistair Overeem just picked him apart throughout the fight. Once again, this went to a decision. All 3 judges scored it 30-27 for Alistair Overeem. Again, it was a good fight. It wasn't overly exciting, but it wasn't extremely boring like I thought it might have been. Up next, we had Johnny Hendricks, who ended up defeating Matt Brown in a unanimous decision, again 30-27, scored by all 3 judges. Now, here is my problem with this match. Johnny Hendricks likes to talk a big game, likes to talk about how he wants to finish fights, tries to build up his knockout power. But when Johnny goes in there against somebody who can actually strike with him, and we saw this against Lawler in their fight back in December, instead of staying on the feet and getting into a slugging matchup, Johnny will wrestle his opponents, clinch them, and try to take them to the ground. Now, I have absolutely no problem with a fighter who fights to win. The bottom line is, if you want to continue fighting, you have to build up wins. No matter how you do it, you have to build up wins. And Johnny Hendricks has done that, and he did that against Matt Brown by clinching him and wrestling him and out-battling him on the ground. But again, my problem is Johnny keeps saying that he's a finisher, he's got power in his fists, that he wants to knock somebody out, that he wants to finish the fights cleanly, he doesn't want to go to decisions, and again, whenever he gets in trouble, he just fucking takes shit to the ground, and it bothers me. And again, it doesn't bother me because he's taking it to the ground to win. It's bothering me that he's saying one thing and then he's doing another. Now, I know a lot of people over the years criticize George St. Pierre for just out-wrestling his opponents and being a boring fighter. I could go on for a long time about George St. Pierre. I am a GSP fan. I am biased, and I will gladly admit that. But here's the thing. GSP still tried to put on an exciting fight most of the time. 3 of his last 6 fights earned Fight of the Night bonuses. There was that matchup against Dan Hardy from UFC 111 where he had Hardy in both a Kimura and an armbar, a vicious armbar, and Dan Hardy just refused to tap, but GSP was trying to finish that match. There was the rematch against Josh Koscheck where he just completely obliterated Josh Koscheck's fucking eye, and to this day, I still do not understand how the doctor let that fight continue. It looked like Koscheck couldn't see out of his eye going into the 3rd round, but the doctor let him continue. I have no idea how that fight was not stopped, and I think George only let up on Koscheck because he didn't want to severely injure him, because he already looked like he was in bad enough shape. So yes, GSP utilized his wrestling game a lot, but he still tried to finish guys for the most part. His last couple of matches, he had some bad ones, but again, he still earned Fight of the Night bonuses in 3 of his last 6 fights, and you don't do that just by having boring fights. You're not going to get a Fight of the Night for having a boring fight. So, again, I'm a little biased because I'm a huge GSP fan, but Johnny is capable of finishing people, and my issue isn't that he's taking fights to the ground to win, it's that he's coming right out and saying he wants to finish guys, and then he doesn't. He just wrestles them when he gets in trouble. If you want to fucking fight to win, that's fine. Just admit that you fought the match to win. Don't come out and say you fought to finish when clearly you didn't fucking fight to finish. You fought to win, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just admit it. And I would have a little bit more respect for Johnny Hendricks if he did that. Anyways, on to the co-main event, which saw the women's strawweight championship defended for the first time as Carla Esparza took on Joanna. I still can't pronounce her last name. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce her last name. But Carla was just dominated. Joanna had a huge reach advantage, so Carla really could not get inside to try and stand with Joanna and throw punches because she would just be destroyed. And anytime Carla tried to sprawl to take Joanna to the ground, Joanna just had none of it. I think Carla had 1 successful takedown in, I believe, 17 attempts, I think was what I heard. I can't remember how many attempts she had, but she tried taking Joanna down a lot, and she only succeeded once. And in the meantime, when she wasn't able to take Joanna down, Joanna just picked her apart with punches. This was stopped in the 2nd round due to a TKO due to punches. It was not a good fight for Carla. I like Carla. I hope she'll come back stronger. I hope she'll fight for that title again. But Joanna was just way too much for her. On to the main event of the evening. We saw the UFC lightweight title defended. Anthony Pettis, the champion, took on Rafael dos Anjos, and once again, back-to-back matches, the champion was just outmatched. I have never seen 2 champions outmatched on the same card the way Esparza and Pettis were outmatched on this card. Rafael just took Anthony Pettis down at will. When they did stand, Anthony, in my opinion, was getting the better of the stand-up game, but he just had no takedown defense against Rafael dos Anjos. And this one went to a 5-round decision. All 3 judges scored it 50-45 for your new UFC lightweight champion, Rafael dos Anjos. So, again, both championships changed hands on this card, and both champions were just completely dominated in a way that I haven't seen 2 champions dominated on the same card before. On to a bit of baseball news. It was announced this week that Pete Rose would apply for reinstatement in Major League Baseball. For those who don't know, Pete Rose was basically kicked out of baseball many, many years ago, late 80s, early 90s. I can't remember the exact year it happened. I think it was 1989. But anyways, it was discovered that Pete Rose was gambling on baseball while he was a manager with the Cincinnati Reds. And of course, gambling on baseball is a big no-no. This goes all the way back to the Black Sox scandal of 1919. So Pete Rose, it was discovered, gambled on baseball, so he was barred for life from baseball. Not only would he not be able to attend baseball events without permission from the commissioner, and there was one instance in 1999 where he was allowed to participate in the MLB All-Star Game festivities for the All-Century team because he was voted as one of the greatest players of the century. And that's one of the few times he's been allowed to take part in any Major League Baseball activities since his ban back in 1989. But in addition to the ban from baseball, he's also not allowed into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Now, for those of you who don't like baseball and don't know this, Pete Rose is the all-time hits leader for Major League Baseball. He has more career hits than anybody else in the history of the game. And I personally think he should be in the Hall of Fame, but because he gambled on the sport, he hasn't been allowed to be inducted. Now, with his application for reinstatement, if he gets in, that means that he will be able to partake in baseball activities, and he will become eligible for the Baseball Hall of Fame. I don't quite know how that works. I don't know if he gets to go on the ballot like everyone else on the regular ballot, or if he has to go through the Veterans Committee or one of the many other voting committees for the Baseball Hall of Fame. But he will, if reinstated, he will have an opportunity to finally get inducted into the Hall of Fame. Now, I personally believe he will be reinstated. As soon as I found out last year that the All-Star Game was going to be held in Cincinnati this year, for those of you who don't know, Cincinnati is Pete Rose's longtime team and his hometown. When I found out Cincinnati was hosting the All-Star Game this year, and knowing that there was a new commissioner coming, I felt the time was right that Pete Rose would be allowed to be reinstated into baseball. So I think the new commissioner of baseball will reinstate Pete Rose. I think you're going to see him participate in the All-Star festivities in Cincinnati this year, and I think you're going to see him voted into the Hall of Fame at the end of the year. That's my personal opinion. I could be completely wrong on this, but that's just my personal opinion. I also feel that it's wrong to not have your all-time career hits leader in the Baseball Hall of Fame. I understand he gambled on the game, but you have many other people of questionable character in the Hall of Fame. You have both players, owners, and as well as commissioners in the Hall of Fame who colluded to keep black players from being able to play in Major League Baseball for 5-6 decades. You have complete racists in the Hall of Fame, but they're in there based on their contributions to the game rather than their characters. So I think the same consideration has to be given to Pete Rose. You may not like his character, but he should be in the Hall of Fame based on his contributions to the game as a player. One more thing that I quickly want to touch on this week before I go, which I meant to touch on last week, but I forgot, was the announcement of Frozen 2. I absolutely loved Frozen. I have no shame in admitting that. So I am very much looking forward to the sequel to Frozen. I saw the 7-minute short feature, Frozen Fever, which was just released recently in conjunction with Disney's live-action Cinderella, and I loved the short feature. I'm really looking forward to Frozen. I don't know when they plan on releasing the sequel. I would assume at the earliest, probably winter of 2016, but realistically, we're probably looking at 2017. But either way, I'm excited. I'm also excited for Jurassic World, which is coming out in a couple months. So there's a few sequels that are being made that I'm quite excited to see. But anyways, as I said at the beginning of the show, I am quite sick and have been for the last week, so I am going to wrap it up. If you listen to this podcast, please feel free to subscribe and to share this podcast with anyone that you know that you think might enjoy it. I appreciate you guys listening. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email them to me at ochopointspodcast@gmail.com. And I will talk to you guys next week. Bye.